Well, good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you signing in on a Friday afternoon for what I think is going to be a really terrific webinar. We're very fortunate today to have a good friend and colleague, Mr. Matt Gerike, presenting to us on he's one of the ESIG award winners with his organization's work. He'll be presenting to us on Virginia's Next Generation 911 dashboard. Matt, I'm pleased to say, is current chair of the Professional Education Committee, works with the Next Generation 911 Task Force, and when not volunteering for URISA, as his presentation might suggest, he works for the Virginia Geographic Information Network as their geospatial program manager for geospatial aspects of Virginia. Let's move to Next Generation 911, as well as serving as a research scholar for interdisciplinary studies at William and Mary. As URISA's immediate past president, I'm always delighted to have individuals like Matt contribute to the organization, and it's a pleasure to provide him the opportunity to share his work with you today. So Matt, with that, I'm going to hand this over to you.
All right, thank you, Kevin, and thank you everybody for taking the time to join us today. So what I wanted to do is talk about Virginia's dashboard. And as you can see, we're up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14 tabs of information on here that has steadily grown and changed and been modified as Virginia's worked through the process of deploying Next Generation 911. In Virginia, we have 134 localities between regional emergency communication centers. We have 124 PSAPs that are moving to a NG911 ESINet with geospatial call routing. And as we've worked through this, really from 2017 to the present, every step of the way, our understanding of the process of what's involved, if it's on the GIS side, if it's on the infrastructure side, is gotten a little bit deeper when we've gotten more folks to each one of those different steps. And as we kind of look at this as a forest rather than a tree, the dashboard has really developed and evolved and added functionality, added features as we move further along, and found that there are other things that we need to explain, there are other things that we need to track, there are other things that we need to make it easy to look up and see for a reference, or more importantly, be transparent about. To the stakeholders in the Virginia localities, to our partners that the localities have contracted with to provide services with the ESINet or GIS side, and ultimately the taxpayers. The grant funds that are used to drive the process in Virginia localities are entirely funded by the wireless 911 tax in Virginia. So we're quite a ways along, but sometimes it's best to kind of start at the beginning. And so what we've done is we've added a new history and development page onto our dashboard that we are going to have a look at, and kind thanks to our colleagues down at the Martinsville Henry Emergency Communications Center down there on the border with North Carolina for letting us use a picture of their very busy call center. But hey, there's a map or two in there, and that's always great to see when we see a picture of a call center. So in Virginia, we are a Commonwealth, and so each locality has quite a bit of control and decision making of how they proceed and move forward. In Virginia, the 911 and Geospatial Services Bureau is a division. No, the Bureau is a part of the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. And 911 and Geospatial Services has 3 divisions. One is the Public Safety Communications Division that has support for 911, supports the 911 Services Board, is responsible for the 911 grant program, and is responsible for tracking the wireless 911 fund that comes from the tax in Virginia. The second division is the Virginia Geographic Information Network, or VGIN. It has the Virginia equivalent of the Geographic Information Officer, and it has clearinghouse responsibilities in Virginia. It also manages the Virginia Base Mapping Program, which has both base map components of rolling up address points, road center lines, and other core data sets from localities, to authoritative statewide standards-based data layers that are used by other state agencies and the public and everybody else, as well as driving the orthoimagery program. The 911 Services Board has a minimum standard for Virginia PSAPs, the public safety answering points, 911 call centers, for the alphabet soup acronyms, that they must have in their call center imagery no more than 4 years old, no more coarse than 12-inch resolution. And so the VBMP orthoimagery program has a 12-inch product that tends to fly at least every 4 years for the parts of Virginia that also offers BIOP capabilities, 3-inch, 6-inch. There's some LiDAR, there's some data processing in there as well. And then as next generation 911 GIS developed, that's my role. My position was transformed to help meet the GIS needs. The third division is a unique one, and it is a team of regional outreach coordinators in each of Virginia's 7 different regions that provide direct support to the localities, particularly on 911 and also on GIS. And so one of the things that has really enabled Virginia to have a successful, so far, next generation 911 deployment, but also really speaks to the diverse interests that the dashboard communicates, is this synergy, this integration of having the PSC folks, the VGIN GIS folks, and regional outreach coordinators that work with both PSC and VGIN to help support localities on their journey through this process. And so as we kind of dive in to the story, it's kind of important to think about or understand how Virginia is set up and where some of these driving factors are. So right now where we're at, we have 30 PSAPs live. That's 24% of our PSAPs, serving 45% of the population of Virginia, about 18% of the land area, and I'm handling about 38% of Virginia's 4 million 911 calls on average. But we didn't get here overnight. The dashboard didn't look like this overnight. And so we kind of want to dive into the story of how we came to get here. And a lot of this deals with a diagram that we developed to kind of flow chart out the process. And so in Virginia, the process started. There was one of our localities did an RFP for next generation 911 ESIG services. They selected a vendor. The Commonwealth of Virginia looked at it and said, hey, this makes sense. We don't need to do our own RFP. Another locality chose to do an RFP. At the conclusion of that process, they selected the same vendor. And so all of the 124 911 centers on Virginia are implementing to the same ESIG system, same next generation 911 core service provider. And so as those contract mechanisms were coming into place and those contracts had cooperative language and pricing for all the different Virginia localities, the team at the 911 and Geospatial Services Bureau developed migration proposals based on those contracts for each call center, each locality, that kind of lined out what we thought the funding would be to migrate their proposal, their PSAP, to next generation 911 at that time. So those migration proposals were sent out. Localities then looked at those, asked questions, and then they had to send in a funding request to the 911 Services Board that was essentially a grant for that amount or most of that amount to complete their migration. So that funding had to be approved. And then once that funding was approved, the locality had to go back and complete that contract with the next generation 911 core service provider. And so our blue phase is kind of the getting started. You have to have the funding, you have to have the contract in order to start deploying and start working with the different elements of the onboarding. Once we move past that phase, we kind of thought of this as three different buckets of responsibility that had to be done. One of these was call handling equipment. And PSAPs were responsible for making sure that whatever version of call handling equipment that they had, whatever model vendor they use, that it was at a level that supports the next generation 911 I3 standard. So that when they went live, they would be able to receive, their call handling equipment would receive the data in the I3 stream. Another part of this was the diverse connectivity phase, which really means in Virginia that as we're moving from these analog copper line 30-year-old technology ways of delivering 911 calls, next generation 911 really means using a IP network and connecting all the different call centers to a emergency services ESIG net to receive these calls and transfer calls between PSAPs. And so part of the needs for that are we need to make sure that each one of our PSAPs it has a fiber connection to their PSAP. More importantly, we wanted a redundant fiber connection, or at least data coming in from two different providers if redundant fiber connections were not always possible. So either redundant fiber or diverse provider connectivity to help ensure the connection as they move forward. And so when we're talking about fiber, we're talking about working with the local fiber providers and local construction companies, running that to the property line, running it from the property line to the building, running it into the server room, getting all that stuff done. And that also includes, usually wraps up making sure that particular circuits are installed that allow AT&T's, the core service providers connecting to the core service providers network as part of this. And so a lot going on with that. The third precondition, the third bucket is the GIS onboarding and the process of having all the GIS data ready. And we'll dig into that a little bit more, but all those three green buckets needed to be done before the testing and the integration and the deployment could really happen. And as we started tracking these things, we started tracking the blue phase because that's what we were working on when we started moving into the green phase. We started trying to understand data to help us understand where we're at with that. And then as we moved into the orange phase, and as more localities moved into the orange phase, our thoughts on that of what's the important information, what do folks need to know, what are concepts that they need to be understood or explained, continued developing. And so where we really started off with our initial dashboard was just really focused on the funding and contract status. This is where we really started to get going. And so the team that was in place at the time, the public safety communications staff, were receiving these funding requests, and they had developed a spreadsheet to note who hadn't sent one in yet, who had sent one in but it wasn't approved, who had funding approved but hadn't signed a contract, and who had signed a contract. And at that phase in late 2018, early 2019, yes, the idea was, well, we're seeing all this, we're managing all this in spreadsheets. Is there some way that we can put this online? Can we share this in any way? Can we make this easier for folks to know where they're at, or know where their neighbors are at, or for the board to know where folks are at, or for citizens to know what's going on? And so there was a team from the public safety communication side, and then on the VGIN, the GIS side, that had developed other story maps and dashboards, kind of got together and developed a plan for what they wanted this to do. And working through several iterations, came up with this initial version. And so turning that tracking spreadsheet in the background into a table as a attribute layer for a GIS web service, and then pulling that GIS web service into the Esri operations dashboard and configuring the map and the other elements based on what folks wanted to communicate. And so the key elements here were the contract status and the funding status, both cartographically in the map, as well as in the graph in the lower right-hand corner. They were interested in tracking the amount requested and the amount awarded. And so there was a counter box with 2 tabs that tracked that. And then the list on the right, if that was selected, would zoom and would select that feature, highlight it, zoom to it. There would be a pop-up that will come up with about 11 different rows of data. And so it'd take you more to where you were at and see a little bit more information about the details of that status. And because the legacy 911 is organized into functional regions based on selective routers, there's also a selective router box up here to where it could zoom and just take you to that region and show the amount requested and amount awarded just for that region. And so our dashboard really started there as we were trying to understand and track, you know, how many people were starting their project, how many people were getting in the queue. So in the fall of 19, a couple different things were happening. One, more than 50% of the Virginia localities had their funding. Construction was starting. Folks were looking towards deployment. And so one of the big things that happened was, well, we have our funding, we're signing the contract, when are we going to deploy? And with 124 different 911 call centers, there are a lot of ways that can go. And so at the November 2019 meeting, the Virginia 911 Services Board settled on a deployment phase plan that kind of essentially went by selective router. We're going to start in the Northeast, DC metro area, Northern Virginia. Some of those folks were further along based on regional partnerships and work that they had done previously. And we also put in some other PSAPs in different parts of the state that had done other projects or were early adopters in the process, or based on their combination of legacy 911 provider and call handling equipment provider, seemed set up to be able to move quickly. And then we kind of went selective router by selective router, moving south and then moving west, trying to kind of cycle through the process. And so when the services board decided upon this, the next question was, this is really useful information. Is there a way that we can put this on the internet, make it easier to find, make it easier to work with than just having a PDF map? And that point was one of the triggering factors for moving from one dashboard to multiple tabs in a dashboard. And so at this point, the initial dashboard became the funding and contract status tab of the dashboard. We added the deployment schedule as a dashboard, and we added a few other things. By this point, the connectivity project had started growing, and so we added a connectivity status dashboard. This was reported to us in monthly spreadsheets from one of the partners. And so to be transparent with that and talking with them about what made sense and how to phrase it, because connectivity and AVPN, and there's some detail there, you know, we tried to get good language that would kind of explain what that was. If a locality wasn't quite there yet, or maybe they were a policy maker and not on the 911 side. And so trying to educate as well as seeing where they were at. So we added the connectivity status tab at this time. And that updates monthly when we get that project sheet. And that's an important point too. The initial version of the dashboard, it was kind of a ad hoc basis. You know, it was one of their updates, send it over to somebody and do that process. When we got to this phase and expanded it, we made sure that we had understood the frequency of updates. Deployment schedule really doesn't change at all. Connectivity status changes monthly. Funding and contract status, anything financial, that updates weekly. Processes any changes. GIS status, that changed weekly as well, or sometimes more frequently, depending on what it was. And so once we went from the initial concept to this expanded concept, part of making sure that it was a trustworthy resource, that the information was always up to date, meant building those back-end processes and procedures to make sure that we were always pushing the most current data, and that we were reviewing the data that we were pushing to make sure we caught any errors before it went out to the dashboard as part of the publication process. So at this phase, we also been working on the GIS side a little bit. And we had been developing different roles and resources, supporting localities, running them through the onboarding phase. We had some other dashboards for those and some other resources, and we decided to integrate it into this one dashboard to rule them all. And if you're not familiar with Next Generation 911, one of the things that makes it really different from how current 911 works is that right now, if you dial 911 from a cell phone, like 80% of the folks that dial 911 do, it tends to determine which call center gets your call based on which sector of a cell tower you're standing in, or you're placing that call from. And yes, there is X, Y, and Z location information that's part of that call that eventually gets sent to the 911 center that they can access through different technology, but it's not available when you place that call. In most cases, that call is being routed based on cell sector. In Next Generation 911, what happens is that the systems are set up so that if, and increasingly this is happening, when you place that call, your wireless service provider sends the X and the Y location with the call as it's being sent. The Next Generation 911 systems will look at that X, Y, that latitude, longitude of where you're standing when you place that call, reference that against a PSAP polygon layer, and based on the PSAP polygon layer that falls within, send the call and a whole bunch of other information to that PSAP. And so kind of introducing point and polygon analysis into routing your 911 call rather than which sector of a cell tower are you standing in. And so from the GIS side, one of the driving points was, number one, getting those PSAP polygons figured out. And two, in order to upload the GIS data into the core system, there's a concept of provisioning boundary, which means what's your puzzle piece? What's your cookie cutter? What's your area of responsibility for GIS data? And in both these cases, it's critical that you work with your neighbors. Virginia, we have 398 or 399 segments, line segments of where one locality shared a boundary with another PSAP or another locality. Because Next Generation 911 is an integrated system, those data need to integrate. For the provisioning boundary, that means that when you're uploading into the system, that it passes the validation and you're not trying to upload somebody else's data and they're not trying to upload your data. For the PSAP polygons, that means that you don't have any overlapping PSAP polygons that may get confused by routing or gaps between PSAP polygons, where it'll still route, but it's not how the system's designed. It's gonna work better if there's continuous PSAP polygon coverage. And so a big effort from 2019, March 2019, through December 2021, when Virginia localities completed this, was working with their neighbors, talking about boundaries and agreeing on that geometry, both within Virginia, as well as the interstate boundaries with the District of Columbia, Maryland, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and North Carolina, so that when their neighbors in those different states upload to whatever core service provider that they do, those systems will perform based on the I3 standards and handle those calls appropriately. So this was one of the early pushes to get GIS data done. And so we integrated status maps in the dashboard to show the continual progress of how neighbors were completing those lines. And then when a locality completed all their lines, and they kind of went through different colors. Right now, the screenshots of those tabs on the dashboard are kind of not that interesting because everybody has completed theirs. But in the maps on the bottom, you can see the status there from January 2020 to January 2021 to January 2022. These maps, the dashboard updated weekly. Based on the neighbors that reached agreement, sent in that geometry for VGen to process, and as that was processed, update that data. And so looking at it for a time of more than 2 years, if you wanted to know how you were doing, if you wanted to know how that key element of the project is going, the dashboard really became an important part to understand what was going on with that. So the other part of the GIS data is that once a PSAP had their funding, had their contract status, had their provisioning boundary done, they could go in and start training on the system to upload their GIS data. And then there's a process to work through the data validations. So there's 7 data layers they have to upload. Provisioning boundary, PSAP boundary, emergency response boundaries for law, fire, and EMS, address points, and road center lines. Then those data layers all have to be field mapped into the system. They have to pass the contractor's validations that are based on NENA standards. And then once all those data layers are uploaded, and they pass those validations, there's an alley to road center line, GIS road center line check to make sure that there's a high level of match, fixed low hanging fruit, make sure there's not a degradation of service for wireless customers. And so similar to the boundary, as we look through time from January 2020 to January 2021, to January 2022, and still going through there's a lot of change going through this process, and as statuses change, and we see the full list here of statuses on the bottom, working your way up towards the top. As soon as a locality changed the status, if they were eligible for their kickoff meeting, they got that scheduled, it changed from light orange to a little bit darker orange. If they had their kickoff meeting, but maybe their provisioning boundary wasn't done yet, we wouldn't schedule them for the spatial interface training yet. Once they had the spatial interface training, they were able to move into the green and start uploading the data and those data layers, and then moving into the alley checks, wanting to make sure that as that GIS data completed that process, that everybody involved, if there were concerns on the vendor side, if there were concerns on the locality GIS side, if there were concerns on the locality PSAP side, you know, that there is an agreement that data was ready to support geospatial call routing in next generation 911. And then the last status is here, if that data was pushed or provisioned to the next generation core systems, and then also if those systems went live. And so we added that as a dashboard at the same time to kind of show that, communicate that in a live interactive environment. And so by doing that cartographically, the same colors are over here as in the static map. Tracking that, you can pan, you can zoom in, zoom out. There's some information in pop-ups, but also using the bar graph functionality to kind of get an idea of percent proportion of where everybody was at. And so boundaries were important, but by the time we added in boundaries, we also had quite a few folks at this stage. The other tab that we included in 19 was we had an existing dashboard on a text to 911 effort. Text to 911 is mandated by the Code of Virginia that PSAPs had to comply with. And so as that deadline was coming and our regional outreach coordinators became more involved with helping them meet those goals, we incorporated the tab into the dashboard as well. I didn't mention before that next generation 911 deployment in Virginia is also mandated by the Code of Virginia. And so that's currently that deadline is July 1st, 2023. And kind of help set some of the movement, some of the planning, some of the timelines that we see in Virginia. So shortly after we expanded the dashboard and got some of those updates done in the spring of 2020, we looked at kind of stepped back and looked at it. We were having more folks deploy. And we realized that the only information on the dashboard that really showed who was live was the GIS status map. And while I think personally that's really important and powerful, we realized that it was kind of counterintuitive for folks that wanted to know the overall status to go to a GIS status map. And so we used that same data. We kind of generalized it a little bit. Into three categories. We have the blue. We had some folks still working on funding and contract. Green, working on the preconditions. Blue, cut over. No, wrong way. Orange, cut over. Blue, funding. Green, preconditions. Based on the same colors as that deployment steps chart. And kind of had that in there as the second tab. We wanted that project overview, big and easy to read. Up front as the landing page, and then the overall status we knew was going to get quite a bit of traffic, so we had that next. Then the funding, deployment, connectivity, GIS, and then all the way down at the end over the drop through the text. So that was kind of as we started getting a more and more deployments, knowing that was a question that we wanted an easy answer to in the dashboard. So in the fall of 2020, as more and more folks were working on their projects and more folks were sending in reimbursements and getting paid out of the project, we had a request from the grant committee of the 911 Services Board. Hey, we're seeing reports, we're seeing spreadsheets. Is there an easier way to communicate what these numbers are, either for a locality or a region or Virginia? And so at this stage, the request was, we want to be more transparent with financial information. You know, if this is a $62 million project for the Commonwealth of Virginia, where's that 62 million? How is it divided up? How is it being spent? What pace is it being spent at? And so the work that we did at this point was looking at the process of how our public safety communications team directly paid some of the direct pay items or received reimbursements from the localities, and how they reviewed those and how they sent those to our accounts payable, so that when that information was sent to accounts payable to pay the bill or reimburse the locality, that we were also pushing that out to the dashboard. And so that involved working with them, understanding their process, understanding their spreadsheets, and developing a weekly process to where if transactions were sent to accounts payable that week, we'd update that Friday mornings and have updated information in the dashboard. And so the first thing that we did was we modified the funding and contract status dashboard. By the time we made these changes, almost everybody had their contract executed. And there are a few folks still working on their funding, but not that many. And so we kind of went away from the amount requested and amount awarded. We recognized that the original amount estimated and the current amount awarded were important, as well as tracking numbers for how much had been paid out and the current amount remaining. And then change the graph to the amount awarded and the amount spent total. And so this was kind of neat because we retained the functionality that if you went in and selected a PSAP or you changed the selective router, you know, it would flash it on the map, but then the numbers would change to be based on what it was for that particular PSAP. And so Spotsylvania County, for example, their original estimate from that migration proposal was $459,000. During that process of digging into their CHE project or their connectivity project, some estimates came in higher. And so they went through the amendment process, got a slightly higher award amount. So we tracked that. They had sent in a request for reimbursement for about $83,000. And so we know there are $427,000 remaining for that part of the project. And that information now at this point also appears in the pop-up. The migration proposal broke out 11 different categories of grant funding. And so on this dashboard, we wanted to keep it at the high level, how all 11 of those categories rolled up. But what we did was we expanded the pop-ups so that it now contains about 36 different elements, kind of the original elements that it had up here, you know, things related to date of award and date award ends and contract vehicle and current migration proposal date, to for each of these different 11 categories, CHE I3 services, data analytics, GIS data, adding data for amount awarded and spent and remaining. So we could do two things. One, we could roll that up here for the totals for the locality and totals overall. But we also added a new tab called financial categories that rolled all that information up for how all those categories were performing across all of the 124 projects. And so it's trying to find that balance, strike that balance between doing a deep dive and what we could easily show graphically or show in charts, and what would work well there, type piece. And so that was an enhancement, and kind of reminding folks that there's a lot of moving parts in this project. And there's a lot of moving parts for any one locality, and that we're doing it for 124 projects in Virginia makes that a little bit challenging, and always reminds us that it's good to have a good dashboard to help share some of this information. So in the spring of 2022, So very recently, these changes went live in the last 6 weeks. Our 911 Services Board and the committees of the board wanted to better understand that award amendment process. Wanted a little bit more detail, wanted better understanding of, if we started off with 55 million and we're now at 62 million, what's going on? What are the patterns of that? What's the data behind that? And so in working with them and working with staff, we added a new tab, the deployment budget status dashboard. And so we felt that this was kind of different information from the funding and contract status. And so cartographically, what the map is showing is the percent change for each locality. And so overall, we have the overall project original amount, current amount, the change from the original amount. This change winds up being 13% from the original. But if we look at all of the localities individually and look at their percent change, that averages to be 23.59%. And so what happens here, if one of the localities is selected, is that that goes ahead and that filters down to those numbers. The pop-up is the same on the previous one. And so we're looking at Spotsylvania again. So their difference between original and current award amount is $51,000. And so that's 11%. So that number updates. But we left this number here the same, that Virginia overall average, to allow localities to compare their actual percent change to the overall percent change. And so if we're showing large dollar amounts, trying to provide that context of what's going on and helping folks understand where they're at in their project relative to others like them or their neighbors. Some localities are quite similar to their neighbors, others are quite different, but there's always somebody that's pretty much just like you, even if they may not be your neighbor across Virginia's localities. So the other piece that we added at this time that we thought was really powerful was, we were getting in, high 25, 28, up to 30 PSAPs. We know that Virginia is an incredibly diverse state. We have small localities, we have large localities. In terms of area and in terms of population and in terms of historical data about how many calls those folks make. And so we changed the overall status dashboard to try to tell the story a little bit better about what impact next generation 911 deployments are having in the Commonwealth. And as our PSAPs increasingly deploy, what does that really mean in terms of who is being served and where is being served? And so we added in the additional dials here for that percent of population served, for the area served, Northern Virginia and the Richmond metro area, some large PSAPs, some small PSAPs, but all those PSAPs have a lot of people and a lot of calls coming to them. But are very different from some of our really large PSAPs to cover really large areas that are primarily rural populations. And so we felt that in a region where we know the basic tenets of geography, everybody's similar in some ways and everybody's different in some ways, that we thought that explaining this difference for Virginia and for these localities was an important part of that story. It'll be interesting to see as the deployments continue how these numbers change and where we hit different thresholds. I think that tells us a lot about the nature of Virginia. Much like geography, if we put on that lens, tells us the nature of many other different things. So the other piece that we added in here is this little dial down here. If you recall, I was mentioning before with next generation 911, for our PSAPs that are live, it means that they're ready to receive that XY information with the call, so the call can be geospatially routed and wind up at that PSAP. So the PSAP is ready to handle calls in that way, receive calls in that way. In order to make that happen, our wireless service providers need to make changes to their system to send those calls with that information as it's being placed early enough so it can be routed. We know that that's part of a longer transition of the next generation 911 ecosystem, but that metric, what percent of the calls on the ESIG are being geospatially routed, is an important metric for helping us understand how the overall system is performing and how it's working, and the parts where our PSAPs are ready and the wireless providers are doing their piece. And so we added in this dial 46% for March 2022. We get this data monthly. The rest of this updates as soon as the PSAP goes live. They change colors. This changes, this changes, this changes, this one 38%, that changes weekly. This number, percent of ESIG calls geospatially routed, updates monthly. And we get that from the core services provider. And so if we look back and see that, you know, we started off early on, it was about 20%. There were some changes made to those systems that in September started increasing. And so this is neutral to the number of PSAPs live. This is just based on however many calls are on the ESIG for whoever is live. What percent of those are being geospatially routed. And so, you know, hey, we're up to 46%. And that's a number that we're very excited to see growing, because that means that the work that the localities have done in the PSAP and the GIS, getting this data ready, working on boundaries, is actually being used and more fully using that next generation 911 system. So that's where our dashboard sits today. I think it'll probably change in the future. I don't know what those next changes will be. But one thing that we've definitely learned over the scope of the project is that we have a lot of stakeholders. And stakeholders are going to focus on different areas or aspects or elements of information as we move through the project and as we get to different phases. And where elements are important there, you know, sometimes the dashboard is the easy way to figure out a way to make that transparent and make that easy to access for staff, for localities, for our neighbors in other states, for citizens, for folks on the board of supervisors or city council. It's a great tool to have, that we have folks used to going there and used to looking at that information and knowing that information, seeing that information, and pull it up at the VG advisory board meetings and the 911 services board meetings. And more importantly, when we're at those meetings, see members of those boards pull it up on their laptop or pull it up on their iPad and look at it, explore the data, see how their PSAP's doing, see what their neighbors are doing, that we know that it's being used in a useful way. So before we hop back to the dashboard, we do have the dashboard is just a number of one of the many GIS products that we've developed in Virginia to assist our localities going through the process, and some other interactive maps, and but also a lot of resources, recommendations, tools that kind of help explain Virginia's journey through next generation 911 GIS. The dashboard, in that it shows the status of different elements and projects, you know, is clearly part of that, but there's a lot more going on with that. So that is the story behind the Virginia Next Generation 911 dashboard. We feel it meets its goals of having information available in an easy to access format, have it be transparent, have some degree of understanding of how often it's going to update, and what it updates from and how it updates, and building trust in the community of Virginia and its stakeholders, that it is a good and reliable source of information. that can be gone to for information about numerous different aspects of Virginia's next generation 911 deployment.
Well, Matt, I want to thank you for what's been a very informative presentation. It's obvious that you really care about the work that you do and the community that you serve, and I know that's true of everyone on this call. Lots of information. Does anyone have any questions? You may either put them in the chat or you're welcome to unmute and ask your questions that way. Gilbert, what's your question? Go ahead and unmute, please. Gilbert, did you have a question? I see your hand raised. You're welcome to put it in the chat too. Might be you just accidentally click the hand raise button. Well, Gilbert's doing that. Does anyone else have any questions? All right. As folks might just be overwhelmed with the information, Matt. This has been really terrific. I'm curious, has anyone else created something like this? Anything you'd like to share about your experiences?
There are quite a few other dashboards we see in other areas. A lot of states are moving towards this in different ways. I know that there's some other dashboards out there. I don't believe I've seen one that has tried to encompass the scope of the entire project that the way that Virginia's has. You know, I think that, you know, everybody's similar, everybody's different. You know, I think that part of that may just be from how the 911 and Geospatial Services Bureau is set up. You know, the 911 folks, if they, you know, want the GIS folks to do something for them, they're not hollering at folks in a separate division or a separate agency or a separate secretariat of government. They're well, back in the days before COVID, there were a public safety communications coordinator and the VGIN coordinator, our GIO equivalent, in cubes next to each other. You know, you can't get more integrated than that. And so I think that that partnership has helped. You know, it's we're not dealing with somebody with folks in another agency. We're dealing with our coworkers in our same bureau to try to support Virginia localities in completing their deployments, comply with the Code of Virginia, and make this successful for everyone living, visiting, traveling through the Commonwealth.
Well, we do appreciate your time and sharing this with us, Matt. I wanted to, we just have a couple of extra minutes here, so I wanted to very quickly share with everyone attending, thanks to the work that individuals like Matt and other committee leaders and volunteers have done. We have a lot of opportunities for you to learn more coming up over the next few months. We've got additional webinars by ESIG winners like Matt coming up on May the 20th, June the 17th, July the 22nd, and August 19th, so monthly. For those of you thinking about pursuing your GISP, we've got preparation workshops scheduled coming up, one of which is next week, coming up on Friday the 22nd. And then we also have a question and answer session coming up on May 23rd. So if you think you know a lot about the exam and you might just have questions about a specific topic that you want to get a little more information on how to study for, that's your opportunity. There'll be a group of experts available on the call that are sitting there just waiting to answer those questions. So please show up to that. We've also got another really terrific webinar coming on May 10th titled Preparing Geospatial Professionals for All Things Broadband. We do have a workshop coming up as well that I'm involved with titled Making Sense Out of Social Indices. That workshop's going to address how you figure out what to do when you're dealing with, for those of you that understand risk or are exploring how to interpret community resiliency to disasters and other atypical conditions. How do you make sense out of all the options that are available today? And that workshop goes into those details. We've also, for those of you that have not yet had the opportunity to investigate URISA's GIS Leadership Academy, this is one part of the organization of many that I'm extremely proud of. We have 2 academies coming up, one in August in the city of Philadelphia, and the other coming up in Southern California in Santa Rosa in October. And then I would be remiss if I did not mention the great event of the year, GIS Pro, our annual conference, which is happening in Boise, Idaho, taking place from October 3 to 6. This is not only an opportunity to learn from your peers, but also to network, to have a tremendous amount of fun. We go to work, we go to play, we go to explore. And this, believe me, is if you've never been to a GIS Pro, you're missing something awesome. So put that on your calendar. It will not be something you'll regret. We'd love to see you there. The other thing that I'll share briefly is if you're interested in getting involved in some sort of volunteer capacity in URISA, don't hesitate to reach out to Matt or Wendy or myself. We would love to get you connected to the professionals that make these events and others possible. So again, if there's any last questions, I'll be happy to entertain those. If not, Wendy, Matt, anything else that you have to share? Think we're good to go.
Well, hope everybody found some interesting nuggets, either from our dashboard perspective or hearing about Virginia's journey with next generation 911 deployment. Always happy to talk, hear what you're doing in your locality or what you're doing in your state with next generation 911. Always happy to try to share the lessons that we've learned or resources that we've developed in Virginia, if it may help you out with where you're at. When it comes to emergencies, everybody tends to be all in, and so I feel that the GIS community certainly has a big and it will be increasingly important part to play in this. And so if we can help you out with where you're at. Always happy to have those conversations and learn more about other strategies that have been successful or challenges that you may be running into.
And Matt, I almost neglected to mention one specific committee. If you're not aware of it, we have an Next Gen 911 committee that talks about this topic all the time. And Matt, I believe you serve on that committee, don't you? Pretty sure.
Yes, and happy to see our some of our other committee task force leadership, Melissa Liebert up in Washington, Rachel Marquez in California are on the webinar on that task force as well. And so if you're interested in that and you know one of those folks or they're a little bit more local to you, feel free to reach out to them as well or look at the task force page on the URISA website. There's a list of some of our other friends and colleagues work on that endeavor.
All right. Well, we're right at the hour. So again, thank you for everyone for taking time out of your busy Friday. I'm sure that you, like myself, got a lot out of this and look forward to seeing you in the next URISA educational event. Bye now.